The sound of shattering glass echoed through Alinea, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, followed by a deathly silence that seemed to last an eternity. Mariana looked down and saw the dark red liquid dripping down the Italian silk of her birthday dress, a Valentino she had bought for $3,000 specifically to celebrate her 35th birthday. But it wasn't the ruined dress that took her breath away. It was the phrase her niece Isabella had just fired at her in front of the entire family. "Now you look as vulgar as you've always been on the inside." Life has a peculiar way of presenting us with moments that divide our existence into before and after. For some, that moment comes in the form of an unexpected promotion, a medical diagnosis, or a chance encounter. For Mariana, it came in the form of a cranberry juice cocktail thrown by a 19-year-old she had financially supported for nearly a decade. There's something deeply revealing about how we react when our generosity is repaid with public cruelty. It's in those instances that we discover who we really are, and more importantly, who we no longer want to be. Generosity is a virtue that can transform into a vice when we don't establish boundaries. Like a drug, it gives us the temporary sensation of being needed, important, loved. But there's a thin line between helping and enabling, between being generous and being exploited. Mariana was about to discover where that line was drawn in her own life, and the price she had paid for crossing it so many times without realizing. Mariana Silva had built her life with the precision of an architect and the determination of someone who grew up knowing nothing would be given for free. At 35, she was a digital marketing director at one of Chicago's largest agencies, owner of an apartment with a view of Lake Michigan, and holder of a savings account that grew consistently every month. Her success hadn't been accidental. Every promotion, every investment, every financial decision had been calculated with the coldness of someone who learned early that economic security was the only real guarantee in life. But there was a part of her personality that contradicted this iron practicality, her almost compulsive need to take care of family. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was love, or maybe it was simply the weight of being the only one who had made it in a family where financial drama was a constant. Her younger sister, Carolina, had gotten pregnant at 18 and never managed to find professional stability. Isabella's father had disappeared before the girl even turned 2, leaving Carolina with a daughter to raise and a tendency to choose men who promised the world and delivered only disappointments. That's how Mariana gradually became the family's unofficial savior. It started small, a few $100s here and there to help with bills, clothes for Isabella, birthday presents Carolina couldn't afford. But like all help without clear limits, this generosity grew like a plant. No one prunes. First came Isabella's private school tuition, then dance and English classes, followed by vacation trips, dinners at expensive restaurants, designer clothes the girl needed so she wouldn't feel inferior to her friends. The situation intensified when Isabella turned 16. Carolina called crying, explaining that her daughter was feeling excluded because all her friends had cars. "She gets so sad, Mari. You know how cruel adolescents can be." And Mariana, who knew well the pain of social exclusion, felt her heart tighten. 3 weeks later, she was signing the financing for a 2022 Honda Civic, valued at $32,000, which would be loaned for her niece to use until she could buy her own. What Mariana didn't realize was that her generosity had created a two-headed monster. Carolina had grown accustomed to solving any financial problem with a call to her older sister, and Isabella had grown up believing that the luxuries she received from her aunt were acquired rights, not granted privileges. The girl developed a distorted view of money and relationships. In her mind, affection was measured by the number of zeros in the bank account, and whoever gave more was whoever loved more. During her school years, Isabella bragged to friends about the surprises she received from her aunt. Instagram posts showed dinners at 5-star restaurants, trips to Miami during summer vacations, designer bags that cost more than many adults earned in a month. "My aunt is amazing," she wrote in captions, always accompanied by hashtags like "We're blessed" and "We're family love." But behind the performative gratitude on social media, a strange form of resentment was growing. For Isabella, Mariana's generosity wasn't love, it was obligation. In her distorted adolescent logic, her aunt had money to spare, and therefore it was natural that she share it with those who really needed it. The girl developed an internal narrative where she was the victim of unfair circumstances, having a single mother without money, and Mariana was simply someone correcting a cosmic imbalance. This mentality became even more toxic when, at 18, Isabella discovered that her aunt had been depositing $500 monthly into a savings account destined for her college education. She should be saving 3 times more. She complained to her mother after discovering the amount. College is super expensive and she makes good money. $500 is nothing for someone like her. Carolina, instead of correcting her daughter, agreed. Isabella, your aunt has always been kind of calculating with money. But don't worry, we'll talk to her. That was the moment when gratitude definitively transformed into entitlement, the toxic feeling that the world owes us something simply for existing. Family tension reached a new level when Mariana announced she wanted to throw a special party for her 35th birthday. She reserved a table at Alinea, a 3-Michelin star restaurant, and invited the whole family to a celebration that would cost about $2,000 just for the dinner bill. For her, it was a way to mark an important date, surrounded by the people she loved. For Isabella and Carolina, it was another demonstration of financial exhibitionism. She always needs to show she has money, Isabella murmured to her mother while getting ready for dinner. Like, we get it that she's rich. She doesn't need to keep rubbing it in our faces. Carolina, who had spent $300 on the supplementary card Mariana had given her to buy a dress for the occasion, agreed with a nod. Your aunt has always been kind of complicated with these things, but at least we eat well, she said, trying to inject some humor into a conversation that was getting dangerously sour. What neither of them understood was that Mariana had planned to use the dinner to make a special announcement. During the past few weeks, she had organized her finances and decided to create a more robust educational fund for Isabella, an investment that, with compound interest, could cover not only undergraduate studies but also graduate school at any university the girl chose. It was her birthday present to herself, the satisfaction of knowing her niece would have the opportunities she herself had achieved with much more difficulty. The restaurant was impeccable that September night. The soft lights created an intimate atmosphere. Waiters moved like silent dancers between tables, and the tasting menu promised a gastronomic experience that completely justified the exorbitant price. Mariana felt radiant in her Valentino dress, a piece she had bought after months of hesitation, but finally decided she deserved. She looked around the table and saw her family. Carolina elegant in the dress she had bought specially for the occasion. Isabella apparently stunning in an outfit that had certainly cost more than minimum wage, and her mother, Mrs. Gloria, smiling proudly at the daughter who had made it in life. The dinner began magically. The dishes arrived like small works of art, each accompanied by a detailed explanation from the chef about ingredients and preparation techniques. Mariana felt justified in her choice. She was offering her family an experience they could never have on their own, a gift that would stay in everyone's memory forever. She discreetly photographed some moments, planning to turn them into a special keepsake of her birthday. It was during the 4th course that she decided to make her announcement. Everyone, I wanted to take advantage of this special night to share something important with you. She took a golden envelope from her purse and extended it to Isabella. This is my birthday present to myself. But actually, it's a gift for you, Bella. I spent the last few weeks reorganizing some investments and created an educational fund that will cover all your college and still have money left over for graduate school wherever you want to study. The silence that followed wasn't the type of silence that precedes an explosion of gratitude. It was something heavier, more uncomfortable. Isabella opened the envelope and quickly read the document describing the fund. $150,000 already deposited, with projections to grow to $200,000 over the next 4 years. Instead of emotion, Her face showed something that looked like disappointment. "Seriously? That's it?" was the first thing that came out of the girl's mouth. "My friend said college costs at least $300,000 if it's at a good university, and this doesn't even cover everything." Mariana felt her stomach churn, but tried to maintain composure. "Bella, this is an excellent amount to start with, and the fund will grow. Besides, there are scholarships, student loans." "Oh, so I'm going to have to get into debt even though I have a rich aunt? How convenient." Isabella's voice had a sarcastic tone Mariana had never heard before. "You spent $3,000 on a dress, but for my education it's just this?" Carolina, instead of intervening to calm her daughter, murmured something like, "She has a point, Mari. Education is a priority." The atmosphere at the table changed drastically. What should have been a celebration transformed into a public judgment session where Mariana was simultaneously judge, defendant, and executioner. Mrs. Gloria tried to smooth things over by saying, "Any help is welcome," but the damage was already done. Isabella had crossed an invisible line, and the whole family had witnessed it. "Do you know how much I make working part-time at the pet shop?" Isabella continued, completely ignoring the uncomfortable looks from other customers. "$200 a month. Do you know how much you spend on me in one shopping afternoon? More than that. So don't talk to me about 'it's a lot of money' when you clearly have more and just don't want to spend it on me." Mariana felt like she had been slapped. For years, she had prided herself on being the cool aunt, the person who made special experiences possible for her niece. Suddenly, she realized she had created a monster, someone who not only expected her generosity, but considered it insufficient and still had the audacity to criticize her publicly. "Isabella, I think you're overreacting," Mariana said, trying to keep her voice low to avoid attracting more attention. "This educational fund represents years of savings and planning. It's a significant gift, not an obligation." But the girl was clearly out of control, fueled by years of entitlement that no one had bothered to correct. "Gift? Aunt, please. Why, you have an apartment worth $500,000, an imported car. You wear clothes that cost more than my mother's rent. This gift is crumbs to you." It was at that moment that Isabella made the mistake that would change everything. She grabbed the cranberry juice glass that had just arrived and, in a calculatedly cruel movement, threw the red liquid on her aunt's dress. "Now you look as vulgar as you've always been on the inside." The entire restaurant stopped. Conversations were interrupted mid-sentence. Forks remained suspended in air, and all eyes turned to the table where a young woman had just publicly humiliated an adult. The maitre d' appeared immediately, offering towels and apologies, but Mariana was paralyzed, not by the stain on her dress, but by the deliberate cruelty of the act. Carolina finally reacted, but not in the way one would expect from a mother witnessing her child disrespecting a relative. "Isabella, what kind of manners are those?" Her reprimand sounded more performative than genuine, especially when she murmured right after, "Even so, you could have expressed yourself better, but I understand your frustration." Mrs. Gloria was in silent shock, alternating her gaze between the granddaughter who had created a public scandal and the daughter who was visibly trying not to cry. She was the one who finally said what needed to be said. "Isabella, that was unacceptable. Apologize to your aunt immediately." "Apologize for what? For speaking the truth? She keeps making us feel small with these grandiose gestures, as if we were her charity. At least now everyone knows how she really treats us." Isabella's speech was the final blow. She had managed, in a masterful move of manipulation, to transform herself from aggressor to victim in front of strangers who didn't know the real story. Mariana stood up slowly, grabbed her purse, and said with a calm that surprised even herself, "Dinner is paid for. Finish without me." She didn't look back as she walked toward the exit, but she could feel the curious stares of dozens of people who had witnessed her public humiliation. The stained dress was the least of her problems at that moment. The Uber ride home was one of the longest of Mariana's life. She remained silent during the 20 minutes, looking out the window and trying to process what had just happened. The driver, noticing something was wrong, didn't try to make conversation. A small kindness she silently appreciated. When she arrived at the apartment, Mariana took off the ruined dress and hung it in the closet like crime evidence. $3,000 of Italian silk transformed into a symbol of family disrespect. She looked at herself in the mirror and tried to understand how she had gotten there. When exactly had her generosity transformed into expectation? At what moment had she lost control of her own life's narrative? She made tea and sat on the couch with her laptop, doing something she hadn't done in months. Checked her social media. What she saw left her even more shocked. Isabella had already posted photos from the restaurant with sarcastic captions about aunts who like to show off, followed by stories showing the unnecessary drama that had happened. The girl had managed to transform her own aggression into a narrative where she was the wronged protagonist. What hurt most was seeing that Carolina had liked and commented on her daughter's posts. "My beautiful daughter, you always speak the truth," she wrote under a photo where Isabella made an ironic face holding an empty glass, clearly the cup she had used to attack the dress. The sister Mariana had financially supported for years was publicly endorsing the humiliation she had suffered. At that moment, something definitively changed inside Mariana. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. A cold and crystalline clarity about how she had been manipulated, exploited, and disrespected by people who took advantage of her need to be loved and necessary. She closed the laptop and made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop enabling the abuse. Mariana spent the night awake, not from sadness, but from a mental state she hadn't experienced in years. Absolute focus. It was as if the public humiliation had burned away all the illusions she had fed about her family, leaving only brutal and incontestable facts. She opened an Excel spreadsheet and began doing something she had never done before, calculating exactly how much she had spent on Carolina and Isabella over the past 5 years. The numbers were shocking. $500 monthly for the educational fund, plus $200 monthly in help for Carolina, plus the supplementary card that accumulated an average of $1,200 monthly in various expenses, not counting birthday presents, Christmas, graduations, trips, dinners, the $32,000 car, and hundreds of emergencies that always appeared at the end of the month. The total reached almost $180,000 in 5 years. She printed 3 copies of all bank statements, organized each transfer by date and category, and created a complete dossier of her generosity, not out of cruelty, but for clarity. For the first time, she would show her family not just what she had given, but what had been received as an acquired right instead of a gift. The next step was even more revealing. Mariana captured screenshots of all Isabella's posts from the past 24 hours, including Carolina's comments. She documented every mockery, every diminishment, every attempt to invert the narrative of the previous night. The girl had created a story where the rich and evil aunt had humiliated a young worker for asking for dignity, conveniently omitting the fact that she had physically assaulted a person in public. But what most impressed Mariana was Isabella's followers' reaction. Dozens of comments supporting the girl, calling Mariana a toxic aunt, and congratulating her niece for not letting herself be intimidated by people with superiority complexes. It was a masterful class on how to rewrite history when you control the public narrative. The next morning, Mariana called the bank and took the first practical measure. She canceled Carolina's supplementary card. The attendant confirmed there was a pending bill of $2,147, which would be debited from the main account according to the contract. "Would you like us to send a new card to the secondary holder?" asked the employee. "No," Mariana replied with a firmness that surprised even herself. "Cancel it permanently." The second step was even more emotionally difficult, but necessary. She called the dealership where she had financed Isabella's Honda Civic. After explaining she was the only person on the financing contract and the car wasn't being used as agreed, she scheduled vehicle repossession for the end of the week. Legally, she had every right. Her name was on all documents and she had paid all installments. The third measure was suspending automatic transfers. The $500 monthly for Isabella's educational fund and the $200 of help for Carolina were canceled with 2 clicks on internet banking. She created a folder on her computer called Evidence and archived all receipts of actions taken, along with screenshots from social media. Around noon, Carolina called furiously. The card had been declined at a store where she was trying to buy cleaning products. "Mari, there's something wrong with the card. Can you call the bank?" she said, still believing it was a technical error. "Actually, Carol, I canceled the card this morning," Mariana replied with a calm that contrasted with her sister's growing hysteria. "Canceled? Why? Because of yesterday's nonsense. Mari, you're overreacting. Isabella is young," she spoke without thinking. "Why you can't punish us like this?" The phrase "punish us" was revealing. Carolina really believed that having access to her sister's money was a right, not a privilege. "It's not punishment, Carol. It's natural consequences. And this afternoon I'm going to pick up Isabella's car too." The silence on the other end of the line lasted almost a full minute. When Carolina finally responded, her voice had a quality Mariana hadn't heard in years. Real panic. "Mari, you can't do that. Isabella needs the car to work, and I need the card for household shopping. Why you can't just cut everything off at once?" "I can and will," Mariana replied, "and I'm going to do more than that. I scheduled a family meeting for Saturday afternoon at my apartment. Why you two, Mrs. Gloria and me, W, are going to talk about how things will work from now on." She hung up before Carolina could argue further. The rest of the afternoon was dedicated to preparation work. Mariana organized a complete presentation. Yes, a presentation with slides, as if it were a corporate meeting. She included graphs showing annual expenses, comparisons with investments that could have been made with the same money, and projections of how her financial situation would be different if she hadn't supported the family for the past 5 years. The most impactful slide showed what she could have achieved with the $180,000 spent on Carolina and Isabella: down payment for a larger house, a retirement fund that would allow her to stop working 4 years earlier, or investments that would generate passive income of approximately $1,000 per month. Concrete numbers that showed the real cost of her misdirected generosity. On Thursday, as planned, she went to pick up the car. Isabella was waiting at the house door, visibly furious, but Mariana had brought the tow truck and all necessary documentation. "You can't do this," the girl screamed. "That car is mine." Mariana showed the financing contract, where only her name appeared. "Actually, legally it's mine, and now it's being returned to where it belongs." The scene was embarrassing but necessary. Neighbors stopped to watch the drama, and Isabella made sure to scream about how her rich and evil aunt was stealing her car. Mariana didn't respond to the provocations, just supervised while the tow truck driver loaded the Honda Civic onto the flatbed. When the truck left, she turned to her niece and said, "See you Saturday to talk about this like adults." Saturday arrived with palpable tension in the air. Mrs. Gloria was the first to arrive at Mariana's apartment, followed by Carolina and Isabella, who entered as if going to court, which, in a way, was exactly what was happening. Mariana had prepared coffee and some snacks in an attempt to maintain civility, but the atmosphere was too charged for any pretense of normalcy. "Well, everyone," Mariana began, "you must be wondering why I scheduled this conversation. Yesterday was a revealing day for me, and I think for you too." She turned on the television, which was connected to her laptop, and the first image that appeared was a photo of bank statements organized by year. "In the past 5 years, I transferred exactly $187,340 to accounts, cards, and expenses related to you two," she said, pointing to Carolina and Isabella. "That's not counting gifts, trips, dinners, and other courtesies that didn't go through the bank." The number had an impressive visual impact when projected on a 55-inch screen. Carolina tried to interrupt. "Mari, you're making this into something bigger than it is. You've always been a united family, and family helps each other." But Mariana raised her hand, asking for silence. "Let me finish, please, because the next slide will show how this help was received and reciprocated." The following screen displayed screenshots of Isabella's posts from the past 2 days, including Carolina's comments. Every mockery, every diminishment, every attempt to publicly humiliate her was there, projected in high definition for the whole family to see. The silence in the room was deafening. "These are the posts you two made about me in the past 2 days," Mariana said, "while I was at home trying to understand where I had gone wrong as an aunt and sister. You were turning my public humiliation into entertainment for social media." Gloria was the first to speak, and her voice trembled with a mixture of disappointment and anger. "Isabella, is this true? Did you post these things about your aunt after everything she's done for you?" The girl, for the first time in days, seemed genuinely embarrassed. Being confronted with her own words projected on a large screen had an impact she clearly hadn't anticipated. "Grandma, you don't understand. She always makes these dramatic scenes to make us feel guilty." "I was just being honest about how I feel." Isabella tried to defend herself, but her voice sounded less convincing when confronted with visual evidence of her cruelty. Mariana moved to the next slide, which showed a compound interest calculator. These $187,000, if they had been invested in the S&P 500 with an average return of 7% annually, would be worth approximately $285,000 today. In 10 years, it would be more than $500,000. In 20 years, $2 million. The numbers were a punch in the stomach for the entire family. "What does this mean in practice?" Mariana continued, clicking to the next slide. "It means I can retire 4 years earlier. It means I can buy that country house I always dreamed of. It means I can travel the world without worrying about money. These are the opportunities I sacrificed to fund your lifestyle." Carolina finally exploded. "So now we're guilty of your sacrifice? Nobody asked you to do that. You chose to help because you wanted to." It was exactly the reaction Mariana expected, the desperate attempt to invert responsibility. "You're right, Carol. Nobody asked. I chose. And now I'm choosing to stop." The phrase had the impact of a bomb. For the first time, Carolina and Isabella understood that this wasn't a temporary discussion or a way for Mariana to vent her frustration. It was a definitive and irrevocable decision. "What do you mean by stop?" Carolina asked, although she already knew the answer. Mariana clicked to the last slide of the presentation, which showed a clear timeline. Cards canceled permanently, monthly transfers suspended indefinitely, car returned, educational fund frozen until further notice. "But Mari," Mrs. Gloria tried, "you can't simply abandon the family. Carolina needs help and Isabella is still too young to understand." Mariana interrupted gently but firmly. "Mom, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm establishing healthy boundaries that should have been established long ago." She stood up and went to the window, looking at Lake Michigan while organizing her thoughts. "Do you know what the most revealing moment was for me yesterday? It wasn't when Isabella threw the drink on my dress. It was when I realized I didn't feel surprised. Somewhere in my mind, I already expected to be disrespected. That means that, subconsciously, I knew our dynamic was sick." Mariana turned to face her family. "I created a two-headed monster. Carol, you got used to solving all your financial problems by calling me. And Isabella, you grew up believing my money was yours by right. Neither of you developed financial responsibility because I was always there to pay the bills." Isabella finally spoke, and for the first time her voice didn't have the arrogant tone of recent days. I didn't know you felt this way. I thought you liked helping." It was a late attempt at reconciliation, but Mariana had already passed the point where words could reverse actions. "Liking to help and being exploited are different things, Bella. And what happened Thursday night wasn't a request for help. It was a public assault followed by humiliation on social media. That has real consequences in the real world." Mariana returned to the table and picked up a folder she had prepared with documents. "Carol, here are the bills you'll need to take over now that the card has been canceled. Isabella, here's a list of public transportation and rideshare apps you can use to get to work. And here," she extended an envelope to Mrs. Gloria, "is a check for $2,000 for you because you never disrespected me and always tried to keep peace in the family." Chapter 14, the unexpected generosity toward her grandmother created an even more stark contrast with the situation of the other two. Mrs. Gloria received the envelope with tears in her eyes, but refused. "Marie, I can't accept this when your sister and niece are being cut off. It's not right." It was exactly the reaction Mariana expected. The only person in the family who had never taken advantage of her was being the only one to refuse money. "Mom, you accept it because you deserve it. Because in 35 years of life, you never treated me like a personal bank or humiliated me in public." She forced the envelope into her mother's hands. "And you also accept it because I want you to see the difference between how people treat those who give with love and those who take out of obligation." Carolina was visibly desperate. Financial reality was beginning to take shape. Without the supplementary card, without monthly transfers, without the safety net that Mariana represented, she would have to completely reorganize her life. "Mari, please, let's talk about this. Maybe I was too lenient with Isabella, but I can't just figure it out on my own overnight." "Of course you can," Mariana replied. "You're 33 years old, healthy, have a high school diploma and customer service experience. What you don't have is the need to take responsibility because you always had a sister paying your bills." The frankness was brutal, but necessary. Isabella tried a different approach. "Aunt, what if I delete all the posts and apologize publicly? What if I work to pay the car back?" It was too late for that conversation. Mariana had already seen her niece's true character, and words couldn't erase actions. "Bella, the problem isn't the posts. The problem is who you became when you thought you could disrespect me without consequences. And the car has already been returned to the dealership. If you want a car, you'll have to buy your own, like most 19-year-olds do." The girl finally understood there was no going back. The meeting ended with a tension that felt physically heavy in the apartment. Carolina left in tears, Isabella left in silence, and Mrs. Gloria stayed a few more minutes to try one last mediation. "Marie, you're right to be upset, but family is family. They'll learn from this." "Mom, some people only learn when they face the real consequences of their actions. For years I protected them both from consequences, and look what happened. One became financially irresponsible, and the other became a cruel person who thinks she can assault whoever pays her bills." Mrs. Gloria sighed deeply. "What if they face real hardships? What if they can't adapt?" Mariana kissed her mother's forehead. "Then they'll discover a strength they didn't know they had. The way things were, they were never going to discover their own potential because they always had a safety net." After everyone left, Mariana sat on the couch and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the superficial peace of someone who avoids conflicts, but the deep peace of someone who finally stopped betraying herself. She picked up her laptop and began doing something she hadn't done in a long time, planning her own dreams. She calculated how long it would take to save money for the country house she always wanted. She researched cultural exchange programs for adults. She investigated cooking courses in France and pottery classes in Japan. For the first time in years, she was planning her own life instead of financing others' lives. Around 9 at night, she received a call from Carolina. "Mari, are you really not going back on this decision?" Her sister's voice sounded different, less demanding, more vulnerable. "No, Carol. This decision is definitive and irrevocable." There was a long silence before Carolina murmured, "Then I guess I'll have to look for a full-time job." The weeks that followed were revealing both for Mariana and her family. Carolina, forced by necessity, got a job as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to cover basic bills if she drastically cut superfluous expenses. For the first time in years, she was learning the difference between wanting and needing. Isabella, without a car and without the indirect allowance she received through her mother's expenses, increased her hours at the pet shop and began looking for a second job. The girl who 3 weeks earlier complained that $150,000 wasn't enough for college was now discovering the real value of each dollar earned through her own effort. The most interesting were the changes in Isabella's social media. Posts about toxic aunts disappeared, replaced by photos from work and texts about personal growth. and financial independence. It was a performative transformation, but at least it was a transformation in the right direction. Mariana, meanwhile, was rediscovering the pleasure of spending money on herself without guilt. She bought tickets to Tuscany, a trip she had been postponing for 3 years because some family emergency always came up. She enrolled in a photography course that cost $800, an amount she would have hesitated to spend on herself before, but wouldn't think twice about transferring to Carolina's account. The most significant change was psychological. Mariana realized she had spent years feeling guilty about having money while her family struggled financially. Now she understood that this guilt had been manipulated and transformed into a control tool. She owed no apologies for her success, especially to people who preferred to exploit her generosity rather than develop their own independence. 2 months after the restaurant incident, as Mariana had begun calling that night, she received an unexpected call from Isabella. Her niece's voice sounded different, more mature, less arrogant. "Aunt, do you have a few minutes to talk?" They met at a cafe near Isabella's workplace. The girl who before only frequented expensive restaurants now suggested places with affordable prices, a small but symbolically significant change. "Aunt, I wanted to really apologize for what happened that night," Isabella began, avoiding eye contact. "And not just for the drink, for everything, for how I spoke, for how I acted afterward, for the posts. I was wrong about everything." Mariana listened in silence, evaluating whether the change in tone was genuine or just a strategy to recover lost privileges. "These 2 months working more and having to figure things out on my own made me understand things I had never thought about before," Isabella continued. "Like how much effort is needed to earn even $20, and how hard it is to save money when you have real responsibilities." The conversation lasted almost 2 hours, and for the first time in years, Mariana felt she was talking to the real person behind the spoiled persona her generosity had helped create. Isabella talked about how she had had to learn to use public transportation, about how she was saving money cooking at home, about how she had begun to value things she previously took for granted. "I'm not asking you to go back to helping me financially," Isabella said at the end. "Actually, I think it was good that you stopped. I needed to learn these lessons. I just wanted you to know that I understood what I did wrong, and that I'm trying to become a better person." The change in family dynamics was gradual but consistent. Carolina, after 3 months working full-time, was beginning to feel pride in her own independence. She called Mariana less frequently, and when she did call, it was to talk about life, not to ask for money. Financial responsibility had awakened in her, a confidence that years of dependence had suppressed. Isabella continued working 2 jobs and began studying business administration at a community college, cheaper than the private institutions she previously considered mandatory, but equally valid for her education. She had discovered that there are multiple paths to success, not all passing through exorbitant expenses. Mariana, observing these changes, began to notice something interesting. Her family was becoming more interesting. Conversations no longer revolved around financial problems or requests for help. Carolina talked about work challenges and small professional achievements. Isabella shared stories about college classmates and plans for the future she herself was building. Around the 6th month, Mariana made a decision that surprised even herself. She reactivated a small monthly help for Carolina, not the automatic $200 from before, but $50 she transferred sporadically when she felt like it, not when she was pressured. It was her way of demonstrating that the issue had never been about the money itself, but about respect and reciprocity. For Isabella, she partially reopened the educational fund, but with clear conditions. The girl would have to maintain a minimum GPA in college, continue working to cover part of her own expenses, and never again post disrespectful content about the family on social media. It wasn't an unconditional gift. It was an investment in a person who was demonstrating real growth. That year's Christmas was different from all previous ones. Instead of expensive gifts that no one truly appreciated, Mariana organized a dinner at home where each person contributed something. Carolina made dessert, Isabella brought wines she bought with her own money, and Mrs. Gloria prepared the main course. It was simpler than previous celebrations, but infinitely more genuine. While writing in her diary on New Year's Eve, Mariana reflected on how a moment of public humiliation had become the catalyst for the best decision of her adult life. The stained V. Alentino dress, hanging in the closet like a bizarre trophy, had cost $3,000, but the lessons she learned were priceless. The decision to cut financial support hadn't been cruel. It had been liberating for everyone involved. Carolina discovered she was more capable than she imagined. Isabella learned the real value of money and respect, and Mariana regained control over her own life and resources. The calculations she had made months before were materializing. Without the monthly financial drain, she had managed to accelerate her personal investments. She bought the country house in rural Wisconsin she had always dreamed of, a weekend retreat that cost $180,000, exactly the amount she had invested in the family over the previous 5 years. The irony wasn't lost on her. More important than the material achievement was the emotional conquest. Mariana felt lighter, more authentic, more in control of her own narrative. She had learned that generosity without limits isn't virtue. It's a disguised way of buying love and relevance. True generosity includes knowing when to stop giving, especially when what you're giving is harming the receiver. The family didn't fall apart. It rebuilt itself on a more solid and honest foundation. The people who truly loved her remained present, and those who only exploited her had to learn to relate in a more mature way. It was a painful but necessary lesson about how to teach people to treat us. And you, who just followed this story, have you stopped to think about which relationships in your life are built on a foundation of dependence disguised as affection? Which people around you never learned to walk on their own feet because you were always there to carry them? Sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing people to face the consequences of their own choices. If you recognize similar patterns in your life, remember, establishing boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-care. And people who truly care about you will respect those boundaries, even if they initially don't like them. Like, subscribe and ring the bell to support more stories like this. And if you really enjoyed the story and want to support this work, help me with a coffee on Ko-Fi. Your contribution, no matter how small, makes all the difference so that new stories like this continue to be told.